So, Paige,
Hello.
thank you for coming on and joining me. Special Effect are a charity that Mark and Sutton first made us aware of, and I met up with a few of your compatriots at
hmm
TwitchCon as well, and I just think that you're doing just absolutely wonderful stuff. So I can't wait to kind of get into some of the more details about it. So
Yeah.
welcome on, and it's good to have you here.
Thank you for having me. It's been lovely to be invited. And hello, chat. Lovely to meet you as well.
Can we start with your kind of your personal side of things? So you're a disabled gamer yourself. Like, are you happy to talk us through kind of what your experience has been with games in your life?
Oh, yes, absolutely. So, yes, hello, everyone. I'm Paige. You might have seen me in the chat as Pandemonium. So, I'm Special Effects Gaming Community Manager, and I am multiply disabled in many different ways. So, I can never remember the entire list. So, last week I was diagnosed with ADHD, hyperactivity type, which was very good to know, which is excellent. I have fibromyalgia, psoriatic arthritis, slip spinal discs, skin psoriasis. There's a bunch of other things. Oh, carpal tunnel in the wrist, issues with calcification in my hands. Essentially, any part of my body that can go wrong at some point has gone wrong. So I started gaming probably when I was three. We had a Sega Mega Drive. And what I now know was ADHD. I didn't really care for the games, but the very tactile clunk of a cartridge into the machine, so satisfying. I would constantly put games in and it'd be like Mortal Kombat. And I'm like, no, that's enough of that. Don't care anymore. Put it back in. So I started with things like that, just watching other people play and having fun with the machine itself.
Yep.
And then went on through lots of things like Pokemon, and I played lots of things on Nintendo as I was younger. But I've really got into gaming when I was 16 or so, when I very first discovered things like BioShock, which I loved.
Oh, the first Bioshock was just a work of art.
Absolute stunning piece. And I was so scared of anything scary or of horror when I was younger. I had a very overactive imagination and I was terrified of things. So imagine my surprise when I got a horror game and was like, this is a really safe way for me to explore being scared while being totally in control of my surroundings and my situation. And now I adore horror. I'm a massive horror nut. Films, movies, shows, everything. So yeah, I started going through more games and sort of ended up bouncing around different jobs that had things to do with games, and then ended up with special effects after my time in the games industry, because I wanted to be part of the industry that I loved and the things that brought me a lot of joy. My husband's a gamer as well, so that's the main thing we do together. Obviously, being multiply physically disabled, we can't really, especially over the last few years, go out for walks and adventures or anything like that. So we do our adventuring in Elder Scrolls games and things like that.
Yeah.
So,
amazing. So has there been ways in which your disabilities have excluded you from games, or altered an experience from games in ways that accessibility had not allowed for?
yes, mostly in cognitive ways.
Okay.
I've found. So one of the ways I explain some of my disabilities, especially when I take medications to treat my disabilities, is basically I get lag. So I can't really play PvP games, especially anything that has any other human players. And I can test this by taking my medication or by playing before I take my daily medications. And I can go from a sniper MVPing matches to barely being able to figure out where I'm looking on a map. And it will do that every single day. We've been able to test it. It's really interesting. And unfortunately, that's something that no amount of accessibility measures is ever going to be able to help with.
Yeah.
But then there are things that have helped, especially with cognition, like having things like characters, having outlines around them. That helps me orientate that part of my brain. I know where things are. And thus, it doesn't matter if I'm a little slower on the draw, because I'm still going to be able to see where things are instead of doing that and then figuring out the next part.
Yeah.
So it's one of those things. There's definitely parts of gaming that is kept from me that I really enjoy, but there are lots of things that have been added to games and lots of ways I've sort of learned to cope, as it were.
Yeah, yeah. Awesome. So, okay, let's talk about special effects. So what was it that attracted you? I mean, obviously, we've talked about your own disability so far, and I imagine that plays a role in it. My camera's decided to not focus on my face. It's just focusing on this thing behind me that says you will. There we go. It's focused on the light box instead of my face, which I can't blame it. But but it's not what it's set up to do. So, so what was it that kind of attracted you to working with special effects?
Oh, so when I was in the games industry, I started in 2016 in the games industry. I worked for Frontier Developments in the UK on games like Elite Dangerous and Planet Coaster and Jurassic World Evolution and stuff like that. And we did a yearly fundraising stream at Christmas, and we'd heard about special effect. It had been something they'd fundraised before. And I got to meet some of the special effect team who I now work with and have done for the last year, which is super wonderful. And although accessibility and disability had been on my mind a lot, obviously from my personal experience, I didn't know there was anyone out there like special effect helping to make sure gamers could have access to those resources and know what the options are in games without having to go and find them for themselves like I did.
Yeah.
So the second I heard that and saw some of the videos and just heard a kid laugh from having fun with a family member that they'd not been able to go out and play football with, but were able to kick butt in FIFA, that was me sold. That was all I needed to know. It was just like, gaming is such a powerful tool for community, and I think a lot of people underestimate the difficulty of being physically disabled and how much of a toll that takes on your mental health, especially when you're younger and don't have as much of a good grip on it. So being able to give a kid the gift of video games and then be able to share that with their family and with their friends and with their peers is so amazing. And that's what initially drew me to the charity. So then we did more fundraising while I was in the industry, and then sort of 3 years ago I left the industry and became a full-time content creator, where I did lots of charity stuff and lots of advocacy work, and I continued sort of collabing with special effects, as it were, and fundraising for them at every given opportunity.
Yeah. Until
last year they needed a community manager because the wonderful Becky Frost was going off on maternity leave. So I sort of just dove at the choice, and here I am.
Amazing. So tell us a little bit more about the charity. Like when was it founded, and what was the purpose for why it was founded?
Cool. So Special Effect was founded in 2007, which is 15 years ago. We're currently celebrating our 15th anniversary, which is very cool and very fun. And it was founded by our wonderful, genuinely kind, beautiful CEO, Dr. Mick Donegan. He's very humble and probably wouldn't like me bragging about him too much, so I won't
do it.
But essentially, Mick was a teacher, and he worked with children with accessibility needs and physical accessibility needs, and was able to help them have access to things they needed at school. But the question ended up coming from parents like, when our kids go home, they're bored and they're not happy and they don't have that access any longer. Is there anything you can do? And so Special Effect was born out of that idea of giving kids and adults. And we've worked with so many different people, but it started with the idea of giving kids the access to fun and inclusion at home. Mm-hmm. And then what we do now is sort of fun and inclusion through tech for all age ranges all across the world.
Yeah.
But that's where it came from.
How has I suppose you can use some of Special Effects' actual accomplishments themselves, but how has accessibility in gaming changed in those 15 years?
So much. I mean, so if you think back to 15 years ago, if you go back and try and play a game from 15 years ago,
what games came out 15 years ago?
Goodness me, I'm trying to think. 2007. So you're looking around the time of some of the earlier Halo games on their original consoles and things like that. The controls were so clunky. Obviously, the machine had to catch up itself, and it was still at the top of its game, but there wasn't really much in there for accessibility. So you constantly had things like flashing lights going off and not having, being able to work with VSync and not having good captioning and things like that. Mm-hmm. Simply because it wasn't really understood that those things were needed. And in some cases, there wasn't the computational power to be able to actually do it.
Yeah.
So in the, especially over the last sort of 5-10 years, accessibility has become something that a lot more people are thinking about. A lot more game studios tend to, have it just at the tip of their tongue when they're starting on a project, which is the best time, in my opinion, to, actually start thinking about it, bake it in from the beginning. and to think about all the different things that encompass accessibility. So a lot more places start thinking like, this is a really dialogue heavy game, we should have good subtitling and captioning, or this is a really action heavy game, but the motion blur could be really like, it could make people really nauseous, so we need a way to turn that off. Like one thing that I tend to need because of the carpal tunnel is the ability to remove vibration. There's a lot of games I've not been able to play because I can't turn off the vibrations in the controller. So it just causes me endless pain. Luckily, a lot of those things started getting looked at a hardware level as well. So some controllers have the ability to turn off the vibration on the machine itself.
Okay.
So a lot of things have changed. A lot more people have started to think about it. And there's a lot more understanding of what kinds of things people might need.
And what are some of the ways that the industry still needs to improve?
I think it is just, again, bringing those conversations in sooner, working with more like sort of disabled people to like test things and make sure it works, and just having the conversations. I think there's a lot more people trying, which is absolutely amazing, but you can always get better in everything you do. If you talk to the people that have the lived experience and go from there, pretty much.
Yeah, that sort of leads into one of my other questions, which is what sort of, when trying to add accessibility into games, what sort of barriers do you come up against? That could be barriers from within the industry, or it could be like barriers from, my favorite, and I do favorite in giant air quotes expression of, this just isn't for you. If like, no, I'm going to throw up a little. It's like, I'm sorry, this game just isn't for you then. Like, what are some of the things that are holding accessibility back?
So I guess that you've got kind of two main points there. And like one is, I think it's all general understanding really when you look at it. So there are a lot of people that think accessibility might be using up dev time and dev money because they don't require those things. But accessibility isn't only for people who are disabled as well, because you could just decide, my eyes really are tired and I do not want that amount of motion blur. Oh, look, there's an option in there to turn it off. Some people may not think that trigger warnings are needed for a video game, but again, it's all about having choice. So I think there's a misunderstanding of what accessibility actually means. And how valuable it is for so many different people, not just one specific user. And then the knowledge and the understanding within the games industry of what they can do and, how much dev time they have and what resources they'd need to allocate. So special effects, obviously, having been about for 15 years, has learned a lot about accessibility in games. And we have a resource called the Dev Kit, which is online. It's on the Special Effect website, absolutely free, because everything Special Effect puts out is absolutely free. But it's a set of videos totaling many, many hours, all about motor accessibility in games with sort of examples and how it can be implemented and where the idea came from and what it benefits and why you could look to implement it and how. So there's lots and lots of resources out there. But if you ask somebody who's never had any sort of physical disabilities or illnesses or anything like that, like what kind of concessions might you need? And the answer is none. If everyone says that, then you're not going to know to put anything in. So it's more knowledge and understanding and going from there.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I do find that being this one of the main issues is that people, and I'm hugely generalizing here, but people don't tend to care about things that haven't impacted them or someone that is, in their inner circle, So like, a person might not have never thought about accessibility issues in a game until their own child can't play the game or until something like that. And I think, it's kind of like I understand the ignorant side of it, but it's the willful ignorance side of it. Like when I see, accessibility in games comes up as a discussion point on Twitter all the time. Like I'm sure you've been dragged into one or two of those firefights. But yeah, it comes, and the amount of kind of insensitivity in there, and especially from people who've clearly engaged in this argument before, like even down to things like games having an easy mode. Not even talking, like that. There's that whole. I don't like to call it gatekeeping because, as far as I'm concerned, it's an arsehole with an opinion, not a gatekeeper. That person isn't stopping you from playing a game because they say that the only way to play a whatever game is on hard mode. If you need an easy mode, then you're not a real gamer. It's like, I'm sorry, you're not the person handing out the real gamer certificates. So so as far as I'm concerned, you're not a gatekeeper, you're an arsehole with an opinion. But yeah, it's like that's why I've seen that line, this just isn't for you. And I think like how that would feel like if let's say that person that was saying that really loves JRPGs, so like Japanese RPGs, for anyone who is not a gamer who's listening, and Japan decide, what, we haven't got the dev time to put this in English anymore, so if you want to be involved in this lore, if you want to learn how to play this game, if you want to be involved in this, let's say, especially if they did it for like a sequel to a game that people are already invested in, it's like, yeah, sorry, you need to learn Japanese in order to play this game now. And like, imagine then a Japanese person turning around and saying to them, well, I'm sorry, it's just not for you. We wouldn't accept that. And it's like the fact that everything is accessible to the able. It's like accessibility is already baked in. Like the fact, imagine the game, but it can't control it. There's no controller, and you've got to figure it out. There's some mysterious way to control this that involves jumping around your room in a specific spot, and then eventually you'll figure it out or whatever. It's like they have accessibility options. They're just accessible to able-bodied and able-minded people. So it's like, it's not that there's no accessibility. It's just the accessibility that you need. And it's trying to kind of, I don't know, it's always trying to get people to look at it from the perspective of, okay, how does it harm you having someone else being able to play this game? How does it, why do you argue for this so passionately? It's like what do you gain from arguing so? Like, a disabled person gains getting accessibility in their next game, hopefully, from arguing about this so passionately. But to people who argue on the opposite side, it's like, what are you doing? It's like, I don't understand it. But yeah, that's me going off on a tangent. It happens. So
all good.
So let's talk about specific things that Special Effect have done now. So tell me about some of the specific projects that Special Effect has done. So I went at TwitchCon. I got to play the eye tracking software game. So it was like to anyone who's played early PlayStation, it was like a version of Wipeout. And you're controlling it by using your eyes. And I found out that, I have ADHD too, so it's like I am quite easily distracted. And I was doing great on this game until anybody else approached the booth, and then I just literally look at them and send my ship into the nearest wall. But yeah, so tell us about some of the stuff that Special Effect do to increase accessibility.
Yeah, can do. So, I mean, what you're describing there is what's called eye gaze games. So those are a collection of games we have online, again, for free, which we've created, which you can control in numerous different ways. So you can use a mouse and keyboard, you can use sometimes a touch screen, and then eye controls themselves. And if you do look away, obviously your eyes are no longer controlling it. So you are going to crash. And that uses what's called dwell time. So you need to be able to look at something and focus on it for it to register as a click. And then you can look and move away, and you can shorten or lengthen that dwell time depending how sort of comfortable you are with your eye movement. But if you imagine that somebody has no physical bodily movement but can move their eyes, they can still use a computer. Mm-hmm. So we use that same sort of tech with what's called Stargaze, where we sort of help people who have lost most mobility or potentially have had an accident or something like that. So there's plenty of people that we've been able to help out who are still in hospital, but using their eyes have been able to go to YouTube and find their favorite song and put on something that helps calm them, or to play a video game like on iGaze, like play chess with a family member, or to send an email and keep up with work. You really shouldn't if you've been in an accident, but those things are then open to you. The world opens back up. So that's one of the things we do. We also worked on iMine, which is awesome. It's a way of controlling Minecraft with your eyes. So essentially part of the screen becomes a big toolbox. Mm-hmm. And from there you can use your eyes to select different tools, different things to place down blocks. And there's been some incredible things built in Minecraft using iMine. And yeah, that's on the Special Effect website as well. So those are three things, all using eyes. Then there's the main thing that sort of Special Effects is known for, which is accessible setups. So if somebody, say with cystic fibrosis, is having trouble accessing a game because they can't use a part of their body, or they don't have enough strength in one hand and so need to use the other hand, something like that, they can get in touch with us via our website. And then we have a team of occupational therapists. I'm always tripping over the word occupational. Occupational therapists who will get in touch with that person one-on-one and work out their specific accessibility needs and what game they want to play, and come up with a physical setup and whatever stuff they might need to do within the game settings to actually make it work. So there's loads of different things. We actually did a stream last week with one of our OTs, Jacob, on the Special Effects channel on Twitch, where we were talking a little bit about all the specific tech you can use. But it goes as far from having gigantic buttons for people with more sort of spontaneous movement in their limbs, so that you're going to hit the button because it's right there and it's big and there's all 4 of them like a controller, to having what's called a light switch that requires the tiniest amount of pressure. So if you could only move a finger a tiny amount, you could still access a button. Or if you've got no hands, you could put controllers down by your knees and use those instead. So there's people like, there's a Twitch streamer called Avi who plays an MMO, Elder Scrolls Online, using a setup that we helped to create. And yeah, she controls the horse in-game using her knees, which is super cool.
That's fantastic.
When you consider that most of the time when we play games with a controller, it's just our hands, but there's so much else, so much more in your body you could use, it really opens up and becomes a lot easier to understand how somebody else might be able to manage. There's loads of other things.
No, I've seen some of the setups, and it's fantastic. And it's like, it's that thing where it's like, okay, actually, there are ways to do it. And again, if you don't know any of this stuff and it's the first time you're hearing it, it might be like I'll be honest and say that some of them were a surprise for me. And then they were a surprise for me for about 10 minutes, until then it was like my brain suddenly caught up and was like, yeah, but of course that, if you've got like, we have, like, I mean, I've got a Stream Deck pedal underneath my and I don't even remember what the buttons do on it anymore because I don't press it, because it was supposed to be to kind of allow me to do hands-free stuff for whatever. And I know people have used like guitar pedals or even like sustain pedals from pianos as switches for various things. It's like, yeah. So there are solutions, and if you can think of how a person is able to move, whether that is with their body or as you've shown with their eyes, then you can interface that. I was really, one thing I was really surprised by was just the fidelity, the accuracy of the eye tracking software. It was quite jarring for about 20 seconds, and then it was okay. This is really accurate. This is not like. Thinking back to say early iPads when the touchscreens weren't that good, and it's already better than things that like we even think of as like technology from 10, 15 years ago. It's already better than that as an emerging piece of technology, and I just think the possibilities for it are endless as well. You've already said then it's not just about gaming, like using the eye tracking software. People can, it's given them access back to parts of their life that they otherwise would have been, restricted from. And it's, I think it is something that, we should all be fighting for. Go on, sorry.
Sorry, I was going to say, I think one of my favorite things that Special Effects has worked on actually in terms of a project, and something I think a lot of people will actually understand a lot more, especially during, after, and while we still are going through COVID, is there's a tech called a bubble buster, and you might have seen one at TwitchCon because they may have taken one, a little white robot dude with a smiley face.
So this is
called a bubble buster, and one we have with us we call Sunny. And what that does is it connects to an iPad. And so if you imagine a child in medical isolation, so in a hospital, not with their friends, not with their family, possibly, up to years when you're in medical isolation, like I'm immunocompromised, so I haven't really left my house in 3 years because of COVID. When you're a kid and you can't go to school and you can't see your family and things like that, that's really difficult. So this tech, there's a little robot, and that goes into the places that the kids would go. So say to school, put the little robot on a desk, and the kid has an iPad, and with that tablet they're able to control where the robot looks, they're able to speak, they're able to put their hands up because it will light up. And kids are able to then interact with the child in isolation as well. So during COVID, those went home with parents sometimes and sat on the table so the family could eat dinner together, went to school and hung out in the playground with the kids' friends, and allowed them to actually continue doing their classes, which, you know, when you are disabled and isolated, it's really boring. Yeah. It's really boring and like really lonely when everyone else gets to continue doing things. So that's one of my favorite things that we've ever done, continue to do. And, you know, allowing people inclusion into a world where they have to be so careful about what they can actually go out and do is awesome, especially when it comes to kids going to school and, you know, growing with their friends, because that's so important when you're younger to actually have those sort of times to be able to communicate with others.
Yeah. I mean, speaking of COVID, I often get like the community to sort of think about like, how would we have got through those 2 years if it wasn't for technology? And again, technology has advanced in ways that allow us to be able to speak to people that are, you know, the other end of the world, like via video. It's you know, I remember we used the phrase isolating but not isolated a lot during lockdown, because that was when a lot of us were building our Twitch communities and meeting other Twitch communities, and Twitch was as itself, as a kind of social tool, was an absolute lifesaver for me during that time. And it's like, it would be easy enough because a lot of us are old enough to remember that there were, you know, life before fast internet. I don't want to go back as far as life before internet, although I am old enough to remember that. But life before like internet, where you couldn't have a video call or you couldn't have like even a voice call, like that wasn't kind of crackling out all the time. And these are all accessibility options. They're just accessibility options that everybody can benefit from. They're not ones that they're not ones that we necessarily need, like to stay in, like, but in the way that like, you know, in the way that the world sent COVID, like if we'd have never had that accessibility of being able to work from home, that had never been created, then everybody would have suffered significantly. Well, a lot of people would be like, actually, I wouldn't have had to work. So, but there'd have been a whole host of completely different problems. And this is what accessibility can do. Every single one of us enjoys accessibility. It's just accessibility that's been made for the average person rather than accessibility that's been made. And a lot of people enjoy accessibility that's been made for other people as well. When you mentioned it before, I actually personally prefer to have subtitles on games. One of my friends used to always say that I'm not experiencing the game how the developers wanted me to, because I would read ahead and then skip. And so, like, especially in Mass Effect, where the dialogue sections are long, he's like, how have you finished Mass Effect like 3 times as fast as I have? Because I'm a quick reader. But like, I liked having those on, and that was a luxury for me as opposed to a necessity. And it is trying to get into the mindset of imagining if it was a necessity. And I think an easy way for us to do that is to think about what COVID would have been like without online. I know we all get Zoom fatigue, and we all got a bit fed up of it, and we all got a bit bored of 2-dimensional faces. But imagine those 18 months without the 2-dimensional faces. Imagine those 18 months where you literally stuck only talking to the people in your house. And I think we can all again appreciate that. Thanks to having a piece of technology that made something more accessible, we all benefited from that, really.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, I'm very thankful for the understanding of accessibility and things like working from home, because I live 100 miles from our office. So I don't work in the office because that would be impossible every single day. But it's only because of working from home that I'm currently able to work, because I'm still so incredibly susceptible to COVID. And there's lots of people still incredibly susceptible to it and to other sort of winter-borne diseases and illnesses and things like that, that without that level of accessibility and having access to things like video calls, as you say, we'd still be in exactly the same situation. So accessibility is really subjective based on what you personally experienced. And I'm very thankful for it personally. And I know a lot of the people that we've worked with at Special Effects are as well, especially for like the kids who just require some help to be sort of communicative and working with and speaking with other people to have a way of getting out of medical isolation and just experiencing the world is so valuable and so helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. So are there any upcoming kind of projects or anything that Special Effects have got on, or is there anything that you're striving for that's not cool? Oh, that's a very, that's a face that suggests you've got something juicy here.
It's a face between, what can I say? What can't I say? How much is my ADHD going to trip me up here? And so essentially...
It's all right. I won't crash you up, honest.
That's all right.
And I'm so far behind on putting podcasts out now. Like,
that's okay.
I have got I have got a backlog of 40. I've got that much of a backlog on podcasts right now. Yes, I know.
Oh my!
I did 36 in the space of 36 hours in June, and that kind of put me back quite a lot.
How did you survive?
ADHD.
Fair, got you.
I survived in the fact that I am an energy vampire, and and I had a different guest every hour for 36 hours, and I basically just stole their energy. As long as the guests didn't try and stay up with me for that whole time. And then I also, out of every hour, I did 15 minutes of self-care. Out of every 45-minute interviews, 15 minutes of self-care every hour for 36 hours.
That's brilliant.
And yeah, we got to raise a bunch of money for Safe in Our World as well. So
that's amazing.
So yeah, but that was how I did that because of that. And I'm not going to put all 36 of them up because some of them are just me over speaking the guest because my brain had stopped working at 4 o'clock in the morning, and I was just like, this is my show and I'm going to talk about me for like an hour, and the person opposite is like, why did I book this? But so they're not all going to make it up, but because of that I do want to put most of them up over, and so every podcast that's been since June is somewhere in the queue. And I'm trying to now rotate them in a way where the topics, like, we've got like, you know, we've got like accessibility one week, we've got autism another week, we've got eating disorders another week, rather than it being like 2 weeks on any particular topic. We did, especially around the time about me discovering about my own ADHD, we had a lot of episodes on ADHD because that was what my brain wanted to fixate on that time. So, but I'm like aware that my audience isn't my brain. So I'm like, let's spread it out and vary it for them. Yeah. But yeah, anyway, again, I told you, tangents. Let's just rewind on that one. So what upcoming things that you're allowed to tell us about?
So I think one of the really cool ones, because we're always working on things, and there's a lot of things obviously aren't ready to talk about just yet, but we will always let people know when they are. But eye gaze games, that we've had a couple of new ones recently. So things like Othello, which have the cutest characters. There's a little blue dude with 4 watches, and he has a jellyfish on his head like a hat, and his name is Blabber, and he's one of the cutest things I've ever seen. So I've been tweeting about him a lot recently on the work channels. So that's been very fun. I like him. But one of the coolest things I think that we've been working on is telepresence. So like an extension of the Bubble Buster robot, there's a telepresence robot, which is kind of like on a big stand, and it can move around, and it sort of tracks the location, is able to move, and it's controlled by a person at the other end. So we had one of the people that we've helped in the past, a lady called Lucinda, who sort of adores chess and is doing lots of stuff around... oh no, I'm going to forget the word and I'm going to feel very bad. I'm going to have to come back to that. It's on the tip of my tongue. My brain wants to say recycling, but that's not the right word. I'll come back to that. Either way, essentially... she, from her home in the UK, was able to visit the Futures exhibition in Washington, so in the Smithsonian Museum, using a telepresence robot. So she controlled it from home using a PC, and I believe using eye gaze tracking tech to take a robot around a museum on the other side of the world near seamlessly.
That's pretty
and
cool.
That was so cool.
That's pretty cool.
That's so cool.
Being an understatement.
Yeah. It's just the idea that, you know, she'd find it really difficult probably to get to America to actually go and see something like that. And then you have to consider the accessibility of getting a wheelchair in and around a museum filled with people. But this robot meant she was able to go there. No flight time, still got to be nice and comfy in her own home and see this really cool exhibition. And it was brilliant. And I'm really hoping to do some stuff with that at some point. I want to tour our own offices in it because I've still never been able to go to the special effects offices. But it's that is one of the really cool things that we've been doing recently.
That is cool. I imagine as well with virtual reality and stuff, there's the options, the possibilities for a lot of this stuff is pretty endless, really. And I've been thinking this for a long time, is the fact that cause with virtual reality, I think will eventually give access to tourism. That with virtual tourism, where people can properly feel as if they are in a place that either they wouldn't be able to get to because of disabilities, or they wouldn't be able to get to due to financial restraints. Or there's lots of different ways in which in which it could work. And yeah, I think that telepresence, it's like I'm thinking now like 4 steps ahead of that, where it's like we've all got wandering holograms going around and stuff. But it's weirdly not a million miles off that. It's not. It's like, I think once technology hits a certain point, it does tend to just kind of like explode from there, really. So once we go, okay, we've got, because with the telepresence thing, you could just have one of those three-dimensional cameras. Yeah, 3D. I was going to say 3-directional, but you could have like the 3D Google Street View type camera on there, so that it could theoretically, with enough bandwidth, feed back to a virtual reality device where the person can look and feel in depth as if they are actually in the room and working with a 3-dimensional image rather than a 2-dimensional image. And I just think, yeah, that's fantastic. And if Teslas have got sensors on them to stop them from kind of like crashing into other Teslas, apart from the occasional time that they do. But these things could have sensors on them so that this thing could move around the conference hall a little bit more seamlessly. So yeah, cool. Awesome. So actually, I've my brain's gone into that point. Is there? I'll ask this question earlier than I normally do. Is there anything that I've not directed you towards with the questions that you think is important? Normally, that's my very last question, but I was having
that's okay. So obviously, with my ADHD, I made a list of the questions that you kind of wanted to cover and the kind of things I normally talk about.
I'm glad
as well.
one of us
did.
Good
to go from there. We're all right. We're all good.
I've got it somewhere.
So I think one of the questions you were asking was about funding and like one of the challenges for the charity. I don't think I'd call it a challenge, but Special Effect isn't governmentally funded. So we are solely funded by fundraisers and streamers and creators and sort of events and things like that, which is why we are so thankful for anyone that supports us. And that's why I love what I do, because I get to work with all the streamers and gamers and nerdy things that go on, and in order to sort of support our work. So that's one of the things. And a lot of people will say when they fundraise for any charity that they feel bad that they didn't raise enough, or that they feel bad they couldn't donate enough. And I both love and hate that comment because I've been a content creator and done lots of charity, and I feel that in my core. I understand that. So I love that I understand it, but I hate it because it's absolute poppycock. Anything you can do is absolutely incredible, whether you're giving or whether you are doing the fundraising. And one of the things I always like to say when people ask me, what does the money at Special Effect pay for, is give the example of £5. Because one of the things you need to put together an accessible setup is Velcro tape. And it sounds so silly, but if you imagine somebody that has problems with their movement, my boss is trying to call me. I have do not disturb on. Go away. If you imagine somebody that has problems with their movement,
they might be telling you something they want you to get into the interview.
Should have told me earlier. It's all good. It's all fine. I think they're having a tea thing at the minute, so they're probably just calling me for tea. I'll put the kettle on after this. But yeah, if you imagine somebody has problems with their movement and they have an accessible control set up and it's on a big tray on their lap so it's comfortable, not putting too much pressure down, and then they knock it. If that was glued down, you could potentially knock it off your lap and break it. If it's Velcro, it's just going to fall over, and then you can pick it back up and move it to somewhere more comfortable.
Yeah.
If you don't have Velcro tape, you cannot build that setup. Literally cannot. So that £5 that somebody says, I was only able to donate this, is the most valuable £5 to us. It's so valuable because that's created an entire setup for someone in a way that's really comfortable for them and really helpful. Because you might think, especially people that don't necessarily have accessibility needs, if you sort of write like a lot, you might find that your hand cramps a little bit, or your thumb hurts, or maybe your arm's a little uncomfortable. But then you can just sort of move how you are and continue. Well, if you imagine that with an accessible setup as well, if your thumb is uncomfortable from hitting a button the same way, if it was glued down, you'd have no option. You'd just have to deal and be in pain. But if it's Velcroed, you can lift it up and just pop it down again and off you go.
Yeah.
So it's literally that. That's why whenever like myself or my colleagues say like literally every penny helps, we're not being cute or hyperbolic. It's like, no, it seriously does.
Yeah.
So,
it's, I mean, I do charity streams. Like I try to do maybe 1 or 2 a year at most, because I kind of feel that if you always do them, they don't have the same impact. And it's also like, I also don't want to be kind of tapping my community for money all the time. Like I want that. And also within our community, we have other streamers that are doing charity stuff at that same time as well. And I've got to admit that I'm terrible at the whole, I want my next charity event to always be bigger and do better than the last one and all the rest of that. And but it's so when you said, you feel that in it's a bit of a double-edged sword, really. It's like, okay, we totally honestly always appreciate the amount of like that people want to raise for it, but you do want people to know, like a new streamer with a community of 3 people that all those 3 people all donate a $5. That's 3 Velcro setups. It's like it's the Velcro for like 3 setups, and it's all. The thing is that it's all. Every £1,000 is made up of 20 fivers, and your 3 fivers could be that's not right. It's 200 fivers. But
I was going to say, hold on.
I've just basically added a 0, and I've found the way out of world poverty. It's by making £1,000 with only £25 notes. I'm sure
that's a bad economic idea, but that's fine.
And that's why I'm not an economist. But yeah, the thing is, all those things are made up of every total is made up of all those donations, and it's all money that the charity wouldn't have had otherwise. It's not like in order to be, it's not like to be a streamer for a charity, the charity are going to spend £500 on you to or anything like that. It's not that you're costing the charity and you've got to make, so anything you make for the charity is money that they wouldn't have otherwise had.
Exactly. And I mean, it's also the message as well, because as I say, people who are physically disabled, if they need help accessing a game, they can come to us and ask, and they send in a little web form that's on our website with a bunch of information, so we can send it to the right people to have a look at. So you might only have a community of 3 people, but one of those might have a brother who really needs help and had no idea that special effects existed. So that's immediately, like, literally changed somebody's life.
Yeah.
And also means that we're able to help someone. So it's not even quality over quantity. It's just whatever you can do is incredible, because there's a message to get out. There's people to let know that we could help, and there are funds to raise, and you can do any and all of them. And it's always incredible, literally always incredible.
Yeah. Are there any kind of changes you would still like to see happen?
What in what context?
You can go as wide as you want. I was going to say in disability and accessibility overall. It can be to do with gaming. Doesn't necessarily have to be. Again, as we've talked about a bunch today, it's for me, one of the big changes I want to see is the public's perception on disability change. That's that's a huge thing for me, and I want more and more people to think about things that think about how could this affect somebody else, as opposed to how do we already know that this affects me, or how do we already know that I feel I'm being a bit guilt trippy now, and then everyone on the podcast is going to be like, Dave, just stop it. But it's but yeah, is there anything that you'd like to see change that? Again, it can be within the industry, within the public, whatever. Your choice.
I think personally, it would just be that if you're given the opportunity to learn something, take it, which is awesome. And then if you can implement that somewhere else, brilliant. Like, use the tools that are accessible to you. Like, one thing I love, especially with streamers, is if they're checking out a new game, is just like have a quick scroll through the accessibility options, and if you know why they're there, talk about them. Like, that's so great. It's normalizing things that not everyone understands, and you're not a bad person for not understanding or not having ever come across something, because you don't know what you don't know.
Yeah.
But then if you're given the opportunity to know it, then take it. There's so much more out there than anyone will ever know. Nobody can know everything. But when we understand a little bit more, we can influence other people around us, and they can understand a little bit more. So that's why when you get somebody in the games industry who knows about accessibility and disability, they tell other people, and then they tell other people, and then you get amazing, huge things like the big God of War reveals and The Last of Us with all their amazing accessibility options for games coming up. And it's so good. It's so good. And you can see all the sort of people with disabilities online going like, I get to play this for the first time and I'm so excited. And it's beautiful. It's so good. It's just inclusion.
Yeah.
And that's what I love to see. More people.
Are there any sort of developers that you think are doing it well?
Oh, I mean, there are so many of them actually. But I mean, one of my favorite examples of accessibility is in Hades. Because Hades has God mode, but it doesn't make you invincible. It makes you proportionately invincible. So what it does is every time you die, it adds like an extra 2% of invincibility on.
Yeah.
So you eventually get to a level where you're still kicking butt, but the difficulty is tailored for you. It's not just on a slider. And I love that. I love how that was implemented. And then obviously you do have things like Naughty Dog and like Sony Santa Monica doing amazing things with their games. And I think like Horizon had some amazing options, so Forbidden West, and there's lots of games that we look at on the Game Access website. So it's another special effects website where our team looks at games and accessible tech and then writes sort of like articles about them. So if a game's got really cool accessibility, they'll write it all down, they'll make it into a video, and then they'll pop that on the Game Access website so you can see, you know, if you're somebody that has issues with flashing lights, you can see where there's an option to toggle those off, essentially. So there's so many games doing so many good things, and we put as many of them as we can on there. I think Warframe's a great one as well, which is a personal favourite of mine, which I played for a good 1,500 hours, something like that. There's a few games I've played more than that, but that was when I say I'm a gamer, I mean it. But I think I've played that over the last 7-8 years. And with their last update, despite being an older game, they keep adding more accessibility options and keep adding more options for subtitling and stuff like that, which is great. And I love to see it. So yeah, those are a few that I think are fantastic.
Yeah. Awesome. 1,500. I'm trying to think if there's a game that I've put. I must have done with World of Warcraft. That was the only one, I think. Because like Final Fantasy games from 7 onwards were all 150-ish. But that's but 1,500 is like 10 times that. And I was only thinking about this morning. I was going to do a post on the kind of the neurodivergent Twitter and be like, other ADHD folks, like, do you ever like, because you do get people that literally hook onto a game and then stay on that game forever, and that's, with the exception of World of Warcraft, that's never really been me. I've been the kind of the typical, oh my god, this is the best game in the world, I'm never going to stop playing this, I must do all the side quests, I must do this, I'm even enjoying the grind of all this game, and then I stop playing it for one day and then never go back to it. It's that full on, it's dumped, it's forgotten about situation. And I don't think there's a game that's been the exception to that. Like, I occasionally go back and play Zelda 3 and the first 2 Monkey Island games, but neither one of them took 1,500 hours off me back then because they weren't that long. There wasn't, the replay value wasn't the same on them. But I always feel like I'm never going to get bored of this game, and then it's like a light switch, it goes off. So yeah, it's fun. So you just mentioned a couple of websites. Where are some of the places that like people can learn more about special effects?
So yeah, there's a special effects website, which is just specialeffect.org.uk, I believe, if I get that wrong. Yes, I was good, right? Specialeffect.org.uk. And from there's a section on like what we do and how we can help. And there's links to iMine, iGaze Games, Game Access itself. Then, of course, we're on Twitter. We're on Twitch as well, which is Special Effect Team. You'll find us on Facebook. You'll find us on TikTok now. We're literally everywhere. Just wherever if you type in Special Effects, special effect team or special effect charity, on those websites you will find us, because we're just a bit of everywhere. And then we have our Discord, which is my baby, where we're actually just talking about food at the minute. I keep being pinged about lasagna for some reason, so that's good. But we're in all the places, and those tend to be where we organise our like sort of streaming and fundraising events as well, because we do have a big one coming up, which I'm very excited for.
Are you allowed to talk about the big event?
I can. So it's called Game Blast. So it happens every year in February, last week of February. Next year is the 24th to the 26th. And it's our 10th Game Blast. And essentially that's when we just invite the entire internet to come together on that weekend and help us fundraise. So whether it is streaming or doing a YouTube video or doing a TikTok live, whatever they want to do, it's coming together and helping us fundraise. So we always make sure that we've got all our videos and articles available. And then people tend to arrange like raid trains and go into each other over the weekend, which is amazing. And I think last year, I think the entire community between them raised about £200,000,
wow.
which nearly killed me. And then I had to record a cover of Toss a Coin to Your Witcher, which was very fun. Which I still owe people a tattoo for that, but I've not been able to safely get into a tattooist. I haven't done yet, so I'll get it done before the next one. It will happen. But yes, it's sign-ups are already available for that. We're trying to cook up some fun ideas for people. But yes, so that's just something we talk about. There is a Game Blast Twitter for that as well, where we tweet all of the latest information. But yeah, it's my favorite weekend of the entire year. Just loads of gamers, like 400 streams going over like 3 days of absolute nonsense and amazing stuff, and building Legos and painting and playing. What was it? I think there was some Elden Ring played with a steering wheel from 2 different people, and amazing things. Like there was, I think, a 40-hour Football Manager relay, which was immense because they kept passing the save over. So everyone was just trying to mess it up right at the end for the next person. So that was very funny. It's just some amazing things, absolutely amazing things.
Yeah, we've just transferred all your great players off.
Pretty much.
End of the season. So we haven't got any questions from chat, but we've got one statement that I think that I would like us to just like maybe contest a little bit.
Okay.
Which says, it's nice to hope for things like this, but it will never become mainstream for every game. I personally object to the word never, but what are your thoughts on that statement?
If there's something you want or something you need, try and let the developer know. Because as we said earlier, you don't know what you don't know. And if there's something that you specifically need that's not gone sort of mainstream as a request so far, it's worth just putting that out in the public eye and letting people know that it's something you require, because there are lots of games who've gone and added things in afterwards, especially where they just go, oh, that's easy to do, and they've been able to add and to sort out. And if there's something that means a lot to you, try and be a voice for it, or if you know somebody else that can, ask them to help you out. There never is a very difficult term, as you say, and it definitely, there's always a lot of times where things feel like never, because you don't want to build yourself up for something and then be disappointed. But until you ask, you never know.
Yeah. So I'm gonna throw myself under the bus a little bit in the response to that question, which is that I'm, as it might have come across, like in this, I hope at least in this interview, that I'm pretty passionate about this stuff, and I wasn't, because it didn't affect me. I was that person that didn't think about it because it didn't affect me. Mm-hmm. And it's the same as when I got into mental health advocacy, is I very kind of much spoke about mental health advocacy from a white, cis, male, hetero presenting, we come from a working class background, but we do all right, it's like a kind of situation. And I often say that, if your advocacy isn't intersectional and it's not complete, I say that now. I didn't say that when I first started. And a lot of people don't say that when they first start, because when you do first start, you get into it because you know what you know. As you've said a bunch of times today, you don't know what you don't know. But I believe that along the way, it is our responsibility to learn and to listen to other people and to make what we're doing as inclusive as it possibly can be. Now, I'm more hopeful for that with the game industry than I am with individual influencers and things, because every individual influencer starts from the point of what they know, and whereas game companies start from a point of what does the industry say. And if these things become, like you said, it's best when it's in there from the beginning. When I did that 36-hour stream, the very first guest we had on was Professor Paul Fletcher, who did the stuff for Hellblade, and he talked about the fact that with is it Ninja Theory? Who made Hellblade? It's possibly Ninja Theory. I should know this, but he said, and I was so delighted to hear it, that they basically got him in at the writing stage, not at the check this over and see how it is. Like they knew that they were going to be talking about psychosis and dealing with it, so they talked about it from the beginning. And by the more these things are done, the more they become normalized, and then they just become what we've always done. There'll be I generally hope for a future where accessibility is just, well, it's like it's part one of it's part of the, we need coders, we need accessibility specialists, we need graphics, we need this, we need a marketing team. It's like we know we need all these things. So I hope that it becomes normalized to that level, and I don't think that's unrealistic. I'm not sure if it's 5, 10 years, 15 years in the future. I don't know. The world sometimes changes rapidly, and it sometimes takes a glacial amount of time to do it. but that's why I'm terrible with generalizations. I can't stand the use of never or always or anything like that, and I occasionally use them myself, which makes me a giant hypocrite. But yeah, I think I'm hopeful, and I'm hopeful that, but I'm also like any change is good. Any positive change is good change. Obviously, any step forward that is taken with it is a good thing. Yeah. And we are getting more and more of that, and we're getting more and more people that campaign for that, and more and more people that, yes, we'll always get those people that are like, why is this important? But hopefully those why is this important people aren't working for the game companies, and yeah. So, anything else you'd like to add?
Nothing specific, I don't think. I think we covered a lot. But yeah, thank you for inviting me, for having me on. And thank you, chat, for being so courteous. And if you do have questions, you always know where to find us. And yeah, I mean, you can literally tweet us if you got something you want to ask, because we tend to be, well, it's my job to be about, so you'll find me.
Amazing. Well, thank you very much for your time today. It's been an absolute pleasure talking with you. And I look forward to kind of continuing to see what both how this develops within the industry as a whole, and in particular, looking forward to seeing special effects role in that.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much.
My pleasure.